Hello and welcome to another episode of Foundation with Steve Teed. I am your host and servant, Steve Teed, always asking you that one important question. What do you build your life on? What is it that you use to help determine the direction of your life? What is it that you use to help answer those grand questions in life? Here I ultimately hold that the one and true foundation is that of Jesus Christ and His Word. And building your life on Him is one that will never lead you astray and one that will answer all the questions. That's what we do here, and we continue to help you build on that. Let me cut back the music and I'll tell you where we're going to head today. All right. On today's episode, or this week's episode, we're going to be, I gotta say, we're going to be a little bit all over the map. But with that, what we're going to be doing is asking, really, what foundation are they on? Does their foundation hold water? And we're going to do that by looking at a few people here. And I'm going to be honest, these are people that I don't agree with on a lot of issues. I'm going to go and I'm going to look at Richard Dawkins for a little bit. If you're not familiar with him, Richard Dawkins is a renowned atheist, naturalist, all that kind of thing. He's done debates against Christians, things like that. And so he holds that there is no God. And so you can see that we've got a very different foundation on which we build our lives in different worldviews. And I've quoted Richard Dawkins a few times on various subjects simply because of the reality that it's a foundation that whether people want to admit it, they actually hold to it. And I want to show how it doesn't really work in a lot of things. Or it's, if you hold to that foundation, it is a foundation that actually offers no hope, no purpose, no meaning, no guides, no morality, no nothing. So I'm going to go visit Richard Dawkins on an issue because he's going to talk about something. And it's something I'm going to agree with him on. Then I'm going to go and visit Hilary Clinton. Now, not because I'm interested in politics. In fact, I have not a whole lot of interest in politics outside of kind of where it's going in the direction of the world as it leads to the return of Christ. That's a different issue. So I'm going to go look at her and her response to a law that came in. And I'm going to look at that because she uses a logical fallacy. And one that is often used in many arguments. So we're going to go take a look at that and see what she says. And if there's time before the break, I want to go over and I want to look at another teacher who was fired. Another teacher was fired and why they were fired. And so join with me, and we're going to cover a lot in the first half. And later on, I'll tell you we're going to go in the second half. So join with me as we go on this journey. And if we're going to go into a news article, as I told you, I'm going to start with Mr. Richard Dawkins. Let me pull her on up here. And as we go, all right, here we are. The article is thus: Richard Dawkins says J K Rowling being bullied by trans activists. There are two sexes. That's what the article's about. That he is saying that she is being bullied. If you're not familiar with J K Rowling is the author of Harry Potter and has gotten herself in hot water for speaking out against transgenderism and saying it actually will hurt women. So let's see what Mr. Dawkins actually has to say. Now, obviously he's defending J K Rowling. J K Rowling, as I said, author of Harry Potter, and got herself in trouble, even to the point that there was a new Harry Potter game out. Sorry, I can't tell you what it is. Yes, I generally do play games, but I don't do anything Harry Potter in any way, shape, or form, outside of I can tell you that there's a couple of characters, Harry Potter, Hermione, Dumbledore, I think. That's about all I know about Harry Potter. Sorry, don't know much else. I know it's a book collection. I know it's a successful movie franchise. I know they have some games. Lord of the Rings fan. Gandalf is far better than Dumbledore no matter what. That's just the way it is. Can't argue with it. Anyway, Richard Dawkins says that J K Rowling's being bullied by trans activists. Let's break into this. Atheist evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins has defended Harry Potter author J K Rowling from the criticism she has received for her pushback against the efforts of trans activists to pretend biology doesn't exist. Dawkins appeared on the program Piers Morgan Uncensored Monday, where he and host Piers Morgan discussed a suggestion from a group of scientists to abandon the use of gendered terms such as man, woman, mother, and father. Just tear it all down. Let's tear down the system. Get them right. That's critical theory. That really is. Not critical race theory, it's critical gender theory. but it is there. It's critical theory, all under the umbrella. Tear down the entire system, because the whole system is oppressive. You got to rebuild them with something else. So the current system we have is misogynistic, it's homophobic, and all that jazz. Transphobic, the whole system. You got to tear the whole thing down. So Morgan denounced the effort to degender and neutralize language, lamenting that they're doing it from a completely false pretext that you can somehow pretend biology doesn't exist, particularly when it comes to someone's sex. It's incontrovertible. There is no scientific doubt about this, and yet a small number of people have been quite successful actually in reshaping vast swathes of the way society talks and is allowed to talk, Morgan added. So far it's been Piers Morgan. So, Richard Dawkins, though. Richard Dawkins says J K Rowling and Kathleen Stock have been bullied while standing up for themselves over trans issues. He says, as a biologist, there are two sexes, and that's all there is to it. And Dawkins described the phenomenon as bullying, denouncing the way that famed Harry Potter J K Rowling and British philosopher Professor Kathleen Scott have been bullied because they stood up to it. Let me jump down a little bit more in the article, because I want a little more on Dawkins, not so much on Rowling. So Dawkins asserted there are two sexes as a biology. There are two sexes, and that's all there is to it. Like Rowling, Dawkins' advocacy on the behalf of biological sex has not come without consequence. Here's the thing. If you understand the worldview of Richard Dawkins, so I'm going to go to his foundation. The foundation of that worldview is evolutionary biology. That's really where he is. He's a biologist. He holds to evolutionary biology, and ultimately holds that the main purpose of all life is to pass on genetic code. That's really what it is. So, for the most part, he's a Nietzschean. He holds to Nietzsche. God is not needed. God is dead. You have no need for him. There's no such thing as morals. This is Dawkins' own writing. If you hold to it, there's really no such thing as right or wrong. There's no morals. Now, I'm going to clarify something on Dawkins' behalf here. He doesn't really have a problem with transgenderism. He's got a problem with the idea of man and woman, of there's man, there's woman, there's two sexes. So he's not against transgenderism. He's against everything that it's become and the ideology behind it. So that's where I disagree with him on it. But he's coming from the idea that evolutionary biology is what there is. It's fact. There's male and there's female. And that's it from a biologist standpoint. And so this idea that you can be whatever you want is bunk. That's kind of the idea there. And so he's against it. And again, as I said, he's an evolutionary biologist. So I agree with him on this. That the worldview that he holds, that the purpose is male and female to be able to procreate, to pass on the genes, to make the human race, or any animal race, basically, to continue on and to be genetically greater. That's the purpose behind it if you hold to the world that he does. And which means technically, and I'd have to go back and find this, Richard Dawkins would actually hold that homosexuality is inferior. Now, you say, why would that be? Now, he can claim that it's natural. Now, I'll disagree with that. Homosexuality is not natural. Homosexuality is from the course of sin. Because of the curse of sin, humanity has become depraved and fallen into sexual immorality of all sorts. Homosexuality being one of them. But from an evolutionary biologist point of view, if you're going to hold to that point of view, you'd have to say that, oh yeah, homosexuality is natural, and then there's got to be a purpose behind it. There has to be. And if the worldview of purpose is always to pass on the genetic code, and this is what Richard Dawkins would hold, and I did read it one place, so I can't give you the source right now off the top of my head. It would hold it thus, that technically then homosexuality is natural, but they must have some genetic flaw that that nature, I gotta use term nature there, that nature does not want passed on. So therefore is giving them an attraction to their own gender, which makes it impossible for them to procreate. That would be the purpose behind it. So if there's a purpose, not by natural evolution, of homosexuality, it would be thus, to stop them from reproducing. That would be the purpose behind it. That's the only purpose would be behind it. You gotta remember, there's nothing good, there's nothing bad. So he was saying that in this case, he would just say that heterosexuality is better because it passes on the genetic traits, if that's your ultimate goal. See, this is where worldviews come into being, if you actually hold to them. This is one of those reasons that I look at and say that if without a creator, without a firm foundation on a creator, you ultimately have a worldview that people don't hold to. The people hold to no worldview at all. Or they're mixing and they're matching their worldview. So they want the idea that there is no creator, but they want the concept of morality. They want to hold that there's no such thing as a creator, but humans have intrinsic value. And you really can't hold to that. See, when there's a creator, what's the purpose of life? The scriptures make this clear. The purpose of life is to enjoy God, to enjoy the creator, to have a fellowship with the creator. And this idea of what has happened in the worldview, well, God created man and woman in his own image. Together they complete the image of God in essence when they are to become one. So the image of God is there. Because they were created, that means they have purpose, they have value, and they have meaning. But if you take the creator out of the equation and humanity comes along simply by mutations, cosmic accidental mutations, however one you put that order in, but basically just a cosmic accident, and mutation somewhat happened. First of all, there is no purpose really outside of anything, that there is no purpose, that basically you live, you die, and that's it. Doesn't matter when you die, doesn't matter how long you live. The idea of morality really doesn't matter. The only idea of morality has to come from your worldview. Now that could be, we have to get along so that it's beneficial for one another, kind of thing. Whatever you want to carry on in your purpose in life, or carry on the purpose, which is to procreate. So the only reason you want to be nice to people so you can make that happen. Therefore, that's the worldview, and you have no choice. And therefore, there is no such thing as morality. There is no such thing as purpose or meaning, except with the purpose of passing on genetic code. And therefore, in the worldview, he would be right. There is only male and then there's female. Why? Because you need both to procreate. You need both to carry on life. That's what he's referring to. And he's correct. And he's saying anybody else who comes at this from any other point of view, he's saying is that they're forcing an ideology which doesn't make, in his case, biological sense. That's what he's arguing. And as I said, I don't agree with Richard Dawkins on a lot. I think he's proven himself in the end to be a fool in many issues. Now, don't mistake the difference between wisdom and knowledge. You can have plenty of people who know lots of things that are, in the end, foolish. And why do I say it? Because the beginning, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. That's what the scriptures say. And the fool has no fear of God. And Richard Dawkins definitely has no fear of God. And he tries to point that there is no evidence for God, yet there is more evidence for a creator than there is that everything happened by accident. And yet people want to deny it. That's kind of the issue. But I agree with him on this. This is why it's fascinating. That there are male and female. And that's the way it is. So even his worldview, which is completely worlds apart from mine, we hold the same issue on that. And that's what's fascinating about it. And yet people try to mix and match. But if you're going to hold to the idea that there is no creator, then you're left with that there is still you're left with the idea of male and female. But it's no longer on moral grounds. It's on biology grounds and biological grounds and carry on the species grounds, that kind of thing. It's just something I wanted to bring up simply because it shows you the foundation that he's on, that people want to hold to, but they want to grasp some other things. It really doesn't work. Richard Dawkins, like it or not, he's actually being consistent in his worldview. It's a foolish worldview that has some areas that are correct, but it's still one that in the end will bring destruction. That's in the end. All right, I want to get to a second story here, and I'm going a little bit faster. All right, our second story here, as I said, Hilary Clinton making her voice known. Making her voice known. Hilary Clinton calls law banning adult cabaret shows for kids absurd. Now, what has happened here is many places have now kind of come up against drag shows. That's really what it is, drag shows for kids. Family-friendly, let me put that in quotations, family-friendly drag shows for kids. On this very podcast, this very show, I've covered things such as the Cabernet show, or what was it, the baby-friendly rave, drag rave. Now, those words should never be together in a sentence, but it actually was. It was a rave show for babies. That's what it was. And that's what they had. And they consider that good. But more places have come out and said, we're banning these things for kids. More states have said, no, these are not allowed. They're passing laws based on this. But let's go into Hilary Clinton here. It says, former Democratic presidential candidate Hilary Clinton called a Tennessee law banning adult cabaret performances from taking place on public property or where children are present absurd, expressing hope that such laws would go the way of the dinosaur. Now, that's just a summary of the article. Let's get in the actual article. The former Secretary of State and First Lady attended the opening night on Broadway of Bob Fonz's Dancin' on Saturday night when a New York Times reporter asked her about Senate Bill 3 in Tennessee. The legislation was signed by Republican Governor Bill Lee earlier this month. The reporter asked Clinton to offer her opinion on whether the bill means that the shows such as Some Like It Hot, which tells the story of two men who dress as a woman to escape the mob, should be banned from performing in the state. She says, it's a very sad commentary on what people think is important in our country, Clinton told the outlet Sunday. I hope that it goes the way of the dinosaur because people will recognize that it's just a political stunt. No, that's not a political stunt. That's not a political stunt. What they're arguing against is exposing children to sexually graphic content and saying that it should be adults only. It should be rated R. That's what it should be. And kids should not be allowed in. It shouldn't be G. It shouldn't be E. It shouldn't be PG-13. It shouldn't be parental guidance. It should be adults only. That's the way it says. So the law, which goes into effect April 1st, creates an offense for a person who engages in an adult cabaret performance on public property or in a location where the adult cabaret performance would be viewed by a person who is not an adult. That's what it is. Now, notice there, it does not ban adult cabaret. Now, if you're wondering about adult cabaret, they're going to define it, okay? It doesn't ban it. It's restricting where it can be viewed. That's what it's doing. So where to be? According to the bill's definition of an adult cabaret performance, so here you go. Here's the definition. This includes shows that involve erotic or topless dancers, strippers, go-go dancers, or male and female impersonators providing entertainment that appeals to the Puritan interest. Drag shows are performances typically featuring men who dress up to impersonate women. Now, I'm going to have to do a definition here. Notice in there it's using a word. So, it's covering things such as exotic topless dancers. Should we argue that children should be allowed into strip clubs? You'd be like, no, that's an adult only. Kids should not be at strip clubs. I agree. Truthfully, I don't think adults should be at strip clubs either. That's on moral grounds. So they shouldn't be allowed. Strippers, go-go dancers. And this is male and female impersonators providing entertainment. Now, they're going to go to that. Now, I'm going to make sure you understand the rest of the definition here. Here's why. It says male and female impersonators. That's all they want to stop. And you got that earlier in the article where the New York Times said, well, do you think this play should be banned? Some Like It Hot because of the fact that it has men who dress as women to escape the mob. If that's the case, then technically the Hobbit Battle of the Five Armies would be banned as well, if that's what it meant. Why? Because you had not the Lord of Lake Town, but his underling there, I just forget his name at the moment, trying to get away from Bard and trying to get away from the battle. So he dresses up as a woman trying to get away from Bard. And he's a bad guy, just make sure, not Bard, the Secretary of Lake Town. I said, well, that should be, does this law ban that? So does that mean Hobbit Battle of the Five Armies cannot be shown in Tennessee? Well, no, look at what it says. It says, providing entertainment that appeal to Puritan interest. Puritan interest? So the question you have to ask then, what does that word mean? What is prurient? My English is being bad today. Prurient entertainment. It means having or encouraging an excessive interest in sexual matters. So put that in there. Put that definition in there. Put the definition of the word in its place of the law. It says, and male and female impersonators providing entertainment that appeals to sexual matters or has a encouraging sexual matters. That's what it is. It says drag show are performances typically featuring men who dress up or impersonate women. Yes, they are. That's generally it. You generally don't see it too often going the other way. So the New York Times suggests that such legislation could ban Shakespeare plays that feature cross-dressing characters or a current tour of the musical 1776 with a company that consists of an all-female, trans, or non-binary cast. It says, I guess they're going to shut the state border to anything that is Shakespeare, she said. Are we going to stop exporting any kind of entertainment? Now, there's the argument. There's the fallacy that has been used. Notice what they latched onto. They latched onto the banning of adults dressing up as the opposite sex. That's what they looked at. That's what they grabbed onto. But that's not the law. That's not the law that was being passed in Tennessee. It was, first of all, it wasn't banning it. It was restricting sexual performances, which include drags dressed up and performing lewd acts in front of children, to being adults only. So it's not banning it, saying that it's illegal. They're not going to be raiding down places looking for saying, oh, look, there's a woman who's dressed too much like a man, or there's a man dressed too much like a woman. We need to get rid of them. It's not what it's saying at all. In fact, with this law, it doesn't even ban something that I am against, drag time story hour. It doesn't. It really doesn't. I wish those things wouldn't happen, but it doesn't ban it either. The only thing it bans is adult cabaret. That includes drags who do such things as dressing up and doing explicit acts in front of them. So what you've got there is you've got what's called, and I've used this one before to help people understand, it's called the Mott-and-Bailey Fallacy. Where they're like, oh, so you're against all this freedom of expression, so you would ban, and like I used, you would ban the Hobbit, Battle of the Five Armies, because it's got a man dressed up as a woman. You would ban any movie that they dress up as the opposite gender to try to get through. So you'd have to ban one of my favorite shows of Lois and Clark from the 90s, A New Adventures of Superman, because there's an episode where Lois disguises herself as a man and to get into a men's club to get evidence. So you'd have to ban that too. Is that what you'd have to do all that? And it's like, no, that's what they're arguing though. So you got to ban all these things, but that's not what it's talking about. That same argument though is what's used in almost every single debate. When Ron DeSantis started bringing in the Parental Rights and Education Acts, they called it the Don't Say Gay bill. Though that wasn't being said. The word gay was never banned at all. Yet that's all people latched onto. When you get into the abortion debate, it's a Mott-and-Bailey. It's like you want to take away all women's rights. That's not what it says at all. This is a constant argument. It really is. It's a constant argument that they use and see what they're using. So you're going to ban all Shakespeare. It's an intellectually lazy argument. That's what it is. And so this bill gives confidence to parents that they should take their kids to a public or private show and will not be blindsided by sexual performances. Johnson tweeted on March 2nd after passing the state Senate. The American Civil Liberty Union of Tennessee argues that the legislation's definition of harmful to minors is very narrow, and that drag performers are protected by the First Amendment. says, we are disappointed that Governor Lee chose to sign a bill that politicians intend to censor drag performances. Stella Yarbrough, ACLU of Tennessee's legal director, said in a statement. However, I want to be abundantly clear that the law that was just signed does not make it illegal to perform in drag in Tennessee, she continues. The law bans obscene performances, and drag performances are not inherently obscene. Yarbrough believes lawmakers will abuse the legislation to censor people based on subjective viewpoints. Huh. That's funny that they argue that. Because I've covered here plenty of times where groups that oppose this are being persecuted, are being censored, are being silenced. Although this law doesn't do that, that's just what they do. Yarbrough claimed that the bill sends a message to LGBTQ Tennesseans that they are not welcome in our state. No. What is not welcome is showing rated R material to children. To children. Does this, if they had their way, would people be okay with taking their for children to attend with parents' permission? R-rated movies that are over-the-top violent, that are grotesque? Should you take them to see a movie like The Hills Have Eyes? Should you? You'd be like, no, same thing. There is a limit. There's a limit. ACLU of Tennessee could challenge any enforcement of the law that attempts to punish drag performers or shut down a family-friendly LGBTQ event, she said. Now, notice that what they're now talking about is abstracts. Now, what I mean by that is they can't provide any evidence of this ever happening. They can't. But there's evidence to the contrary, that these drag shows are hypersexual, that these drag shows are sexualizing kids. Let's give some things here. As the Christian Post has previously reported, multiple drag shows throughout the country marketed as family-friendly have faced backlash from lawmakers and critics on social media who argue they expose children to sexual content. One event in particular, the Drag the Kids to Pride show, hosted last June in Dallas, Texas, prompted Republican Texas Representative Brian Slayton, Texas representative, again, Republican Representative Brian Slayton, to promise he'd introduce law banning drag shows. The state representative was reacting to reports of minors attending the event. Slayton finally introduced that bill earlier this month. Photos and video footage of the event showed men in drag performing in front of children. One artist danced suggestively under a sign that read, "It's not going to lick itself," and accepted tips from kids in the audience. Yeah, that's family friendly. In December, the James L. Knight Center in Miami and the Plaza Live in Orlando hosted a drag queen Christmas. Both venues received a letter from the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulations warning that it would take any and all actions available if minors were allowed to attend. And I saw a couple of the videos from that, and it is hyper-sexualized. That's what it is. You see, these things, they're real. They're letting kids in. Let me give you another one. The other example here. The event hosted by performers, this is from the same one, Nina West and Trinity the Tuck, now you can get the reference there, featured actors telling stories about Santa while male actors danced suggestively as sexual videos played in the background. At one point during the show, a man wearing prosthetic breasts who accepted tips from the audience asked a child at the event, "Are you reaching for my breasts? Are you hungry?" Do you see what's going on? Do you see how they're arguing it? Do you see what's happening? It's a faulty argument, and Hilary Clinton's making it, saying, "Oh, they're going to ban all this," and the New York Times is doing the same thing. They're going to ban all Shakespeare. They're going to take away our right to express ourselves. No, what the limit is children should not be exposed to these things. It shouldn't be. And that's what they're trying to argue. You see, the worldview is like, they're like, "Oh, you're ripping away the rights of these people." No, they're not. As I said, they're not even arguing about Drag Time Story Hour. They're arguing about the times when these drag shows are being declared child-friendly. They're being declared family-friendly. And what do they turn around and do? They have children come to these, and then they engage in sexually explicit activities. If we ban children from attending things with with erotic dancers, which we should. We ban them from going to R-rated movies, which they should. Then they should be banned from these things. They shouldn't be, yet they're being pushed in every aspect, in every way. All right, I want to get to a third story. I know I'm already hit. I usually try to keep it about a half an hour, but if you follow along with here, I skipped an episode last week, just the way my schedule was. I wasn't able to tape one. So I got extra time this week. You can always pause and come back to it. I want to go to a third one here. A teacher who was fired. A teacher who was fired. And the reason I like to cover these is because exactly what Richard Dawkins said about being bullied. So let's get to a third story. All right, a third story. A teacher was fired. A Christian teacher has been fired from his post after claiming that homosexuality is invading the church. That's what it is. After claiming that homosexuality is invading the church, and a post he uploaded to social media. Edwards is reportedly appealing the decision, arguing that the college's position that he may have broken its social media policy does not take into account his right to freely express his religious beliefs. According to a report that the Telegraph, the theology lecturer was eventually removed from his position at Cliff College in Derbyshire after a post criticizing the increasing prominence of homosexuality within the faith went viral online. Now, to understand this, to make this even worse, it's a Methodist school. A Methodist school. So it's a school that claims to be Christian. And their theology professor posted something on social media, and they suspended him. He was fired. Here's the actual post. Here's the tweet. Homosexuality is invading the church. I agree. Just like any sin is. It says evangelicals no longer see the severity of this because they're busy apologizing for their apparent barbaric homophobia, whether or not it's true. And he says this is a gospel issue. By the way, he says if sin is no longer sin, we no longer need a savior. I absolutely agree with that. This is happening. This is happening. The influence of the outside world, the influence of, in this case, the bullies, as Richard Dawkins called them, of the LGBTQ, they're influencing the church to such a point, saying, church, you're being oppressive, you're not being loving. So the church is now apologizing for even daring saying that homosexuality is a sin, that homosexuality is an affront against God, that homosexuality is something that needs to be repented of, that the church is too busy apologizing for this and saying that, oh no, it's no longer a sin, that they've become so weak and ineffective, they've allowed it to invade the church. I absolutely agree with Aaron Edwards. Guess I'll never teach at that school. That's fine by me. Says this prompted the teaching institution to suspend the lecturer, with officials from the college even allegedly threatening to report him to the UK counter-terrorism police over his views. That's what I really wanted to focus on. This firing of this isn't, I would like to say isn't news, but it's news, but it isn't something that is surprising. This is happening more and more. If you look, I've covered this from across the world. I covered a child who at a Catholic school was suspended because he refused to accept transgenderism, which is the official Catholic doctrine, and I can show you that, is the official Catholic doctrine. He refused to associate it when in a class discussion, which was brought up by the teacher. He refused. He was suspended for not agreeing with transgenderism, and then when he wanted to return, tried to return to the school, they had him arrested for trespassing. That's happened in Canada. And they'll mention here, this article too, the one that I've covered, a woman who was arrested not once but twice for silently praying outside an abortion clinic. That has come to happen. Then there's also another case, a street preacher who was assigned community service, I think I'll cover this one, for proselytizing. Then you've got a law in the States that is looking to come into effect, various laws about putting a protection zone around drag performances, same as they do around abortion clinics. So you wouldn't, any type of protesting, and the UK defines protesting as praying, this is where you see evil on the rise. But it's to the point here that it says that they were allegedly threatening to report him to the counter-terror police. Can you say Gestapo? Can you say Gestapo? They're sending it to the counter-terror police. That he wrote a post. There's the post. He says he calls it a sin. He says that the church evangelical is too busy trying to apologize for apparent barbaric homophobia, whether it's true or not. And he calls it a sin. And they threaten to report him to the UK counter-terror police. They want to report him as a terrorist. Think about that. Anyone concerned about academic freedom, Christian freedoms, and free speech should be deeply concerned by what has happened to me, the lecturer reportedly told The Telegraph. And then you get here, a Christian preacher reported to UK terror police after calling trans woman a man in women's clothing. Think about this. He calls a trans woman just a man dressed up as a woman. That's now terrorism in the UK. The former lecturer is now one of the latest of many Christian persecuted in the UK as a result of them expressing their beliefs, when the police in the country now regularly arresting and charging those deemed to be practicing the religion in a way contrary to modern progressive ideologies. For instance, one man was convicted of harassment for preaching against transgenderism on a street in England, with a court handing him a 12-month community orders with 80 hours unpaid work for his proselytizing. 80 hours community service. What's more, his claim that a so-called transgender woman was really a man in a woman's clothing even prompted authorities to refer him to the UK counter-terrorism police for fear he was an extremist. Yeah. Man, then the other story that I've put on, meanwhile, another Christian woman has now been arrested by the police multiple times for standing silently in the vicinity of an abortion clinic. And I know for a fact one of those times it was closed at the time in their country, with law enforcement officials arguing that she seemed to be praying silently in her head. The UK Conservative Party has largely aided and abetted attempts to prevent even silent prayer. That's the Conservative Party. Outside such facilities, with the British Parliament currently pushing through a bill that would outright ban such practices within a 150-meter radius. That's conservatives. Conservatives usually meant conservative values. But it's the fact that they're getting reported for terrorism. That reminds me of the movie, John Hagee put out movies a while back, end time movies. Oh no, sorry, not John Hagee, Jack Van Impe. Jack Van Impe, Apocalypse, Revelation, Tribulation, Judgment. He had 4 of them in that series. I own all 4. I just find them fascinating movies. The second movie, Revelation, Jeff Fahey's in it. And the Christians have been labeled, not Christians anymore, they're labeled haters. Haters, and deemed as terrorists. And you see, how that would never happen. Here's what you've got. You've got a man who just, on his social media account, says something, and they threatened to report him for terrorism to the counterterrorism police. You got a man preaching in the streets reported for terrorism because he's an extremist. This is what is taking place. And he said, well, that's not happening here. Well, sure it is. Think about it. Somebody who's being told now in North America that they hold that homosexuality is a sin, they hold that transgenderism is wrong, they're being recorded as a far-right extremist. Extremist. And they're using that word is being used purposely to connect it with terrorism. That is the point. If you go back 10, 15 years, extremist meant terrorist. It was synonymous with terrorist. Now it's being used of anybody who's on any kind of political spectrum. Now make no mistake, those who are conservatives will make the same statement about far right. They'll call them far left extremists. But the word extremist is being used to purposely connect it with terrorism. This is what we're coming into. And the reason I wanted to cover these all today is because you see how these arguments can form. You see how they can come to be. And that's the problem. That's the problem. We've got to deal with this. Is what's taking place. And it's going to happen more and more. And what is happening is this split, this divide is happening. It's a divide that is very fascinating because it really is what this theologian teacher said. It's invading the church. Now, it's not just homosexuality that's invaded the church. I'm going to call it the full-on liberalism, not classical liberalism, But this modern liberalism has infiltrated the church with this idea, and they've snuck it in the same way they did before. The idea of social justice, the idea of critical race theory, critical theory has snuck in there, and it's caused this divide. And it's made the church be something that it's not. Or sorry, let me correct that. It's made Christians something that they're not. And the true Christians are being called extremists. They're being called the oppressors of modern society in that aspect. And because of this, what is happening is within the realm of the churches themselves are splitting between those who are going off, calling it love when it's really not, falling off into the left-wing liberalism, and those who want to hold true to the solid foundation of Jesus Christ. This is what you're actually seeing, is the split between that. See, you've got a double split happening. You got a split within the culture itself between in this case, liberal and conservatives, Republican, Democrat, liberalism and conservatism. You got that kind of split. And then even in the conservatism side, which typically a Christian would fall, you've got the split within Christendom, which is dividing. And it's causing the Christians themselves, like I said, you've got a Methodist church firing one of their theology professors because he voiced such a thing and wanted to report him for terrorism. A Catholic school suspending and trespassing a student because he spoke out against transgenderism. Now keep in mind, in both of those cases, those are organizations, Methodist and Catholic, who hold to the teaching that transgenderism is actually a sin, that homosexuality is a sin. Yet they're arresting their own. They're dividing over it. In the Protestant circles, you're seeing this all the time. You're seeing more and more churches and denominations splitting. The Methodist Church in North America is definitely splitting. And here's a recent vote of the largest Methodist church has decided to split from the greater organization because of this issue, because they voted against it. The church did, not the organization. The church did. They split from it. This is happening. This shouldn't be a surprise that this stuff is happening. Judgment is going to come. And what you're seeing in all these cases is the proof of the evidence of humanity storing up wrath for itself. Romans chapter 1. That the wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness. And then it goes on to define ungodliness. For the rest of Romans 1, Romans 2, and into Romans 3. It defines this ungodliness, is what it does. And in that, sexual morality is a big one. They've rejected the natural use of men. Women have rejected natural use of men and burned in lust for one another. And likewise, men have done the same thing. And then you get into the reprobate, where God has handed them over to depraved minds, completely depraved. Not only do they themselves do it, they now celebrate these things. It's a sign that the judgment of God is going to fall. And the first thing where it's going to fall is within the church. That's where it's going to start. And what you're seeing is this taking place, where the true believers and the false converts are splitting from one another, where the wheat and the chaff are being separated as the end of the harvest is coming and judgment is going to fall. That is what you're seeing take place. And the more, as time goes on, the more you're going to see reports like this. You're going to see more and more people push, saying these are non-issues. This is non-issue. The Christians have to. No, the Christian has to stand firm on the foundation of Jesus Christ and never be moved from it. That's where the Christian has to be. All right, I want to take the break there. Come on back after the break. And what we're going to do after the break, we're going to ask a question. Is faith faith if you never show it? Is faith faith if you never show it? Because that's really what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about that after the break. So come on back after the break. As always, you want to talk, you want to discuss anything on the show, feel free to write in. You can put it in the comments if you're one of our video listeners. You can write to me, pastorstephenteed@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you. But come on back after the break as we continue on. And we're going to be looking at, is faith faith if you never show it?
On behalf of the team at Creation Ministries International, thank you for your first-time visit to creation.com. Creation or evolution? Design or time and chance? It's a foundational question that affects every human being. And that's because what you believe about where we came from affects your ideas about the meaning of life, how you live it, and where you're headed. You see, what you believe about where you came from also shapes your view on whether there's an eternity or not. If we are the result of meaningless chance, then we simply return to nothing when we die. But if there is a Creator God, the Bible tells us that He has done something about the fact we will all eventually die. But can the Bible be trusted in an age of science? We pose 3 big questions and hope that you can see that the answers to questions 2 and 3 depend upon what you believe about the first one. Creation.com represents over 30 years of research by many scientists and specialists, and here you will find articles and media presentations on this hot button topic, the creation versus evolution debate. Best of all, it's all free. Many have questions like, what about dinosaurs in the Bible? Could God have used evolution? Is there life on other planets? And why would a loving God allow suffering and death? We've endeavored to answer these and hundreds more. So please enjoy creation.com.
All right, welcome back after the break. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you've probably gotten familiar with that advertisement. You may ask, why is it that I keep using an advertisement for creation.com? It's got nothing to do. I get no money for this. I am not getting paid to advertise it. I just think it's a very good resource, because one of the arguments that is often used, and this is where Dawkins who said that there was no evidence for God, is the fact that science actually does back up a creator and gives and science actually proves the scriptures. And creation.com looks at scientific answers from various sources, answers those questions that are out there. What do they have, like 14,000 articles, and their staff is PhD scientists, so you even fulfills that so-called argument from authority aspects. If you're not familiar with what that is like when you answer is like, there are two sexes, man and woman. It's like, are you a biologist? Are you a biologist? Remember that from the Supreme Court trials? Like, okay, what is a woman? It's like, well, I'm not a biologist. See, it's that argument for authority. It satisfies that. And I encourage you to check it out. When you see other things and you see people putting forth these arguments and saying, this is what the science says, like, well, does it really? Or is there another possible explanation for all these things? Is there another possible explanation for why the geology looks the way it does and such things like that? That is covered on creation.com. That's why I push that. All right, let's go now into our after the break section here. If you're not familiar with that, our after the break session that I look at is always about helping you to build on the solid foundation. Now, that happens a little bit before the break, but before the break is really showing what is out there and the different worldviews and different foundations that are out there that they don't really hold up if you take them to the extreme. Whereas now we're looking at building on that solid foundation. And this one comes, actually, again, it's going to start with an article, but it originally came from an assignment that my son brought home from school. Now, it's no secret that I keep one of my children in a Christian private school if I can. We have to make some sacrifices to afford it, and we apply for grants and things like that. But we do what we have to because we think it's important. And so he takes various courses, and we get discussion on things like science. And he asks, like, Dad, why do I got to study science? And I argue, it's like, because when you study science, you can learn about the creator who made it. But one of the other courses that he takes, and he actually enjoys it, is his religious studies course. In his religious studies course, this particular time, he's going through Genesis, which is always a good book, and it's good to study and to understand because it answers a lot of questions and helps to start the foundation. And he gets to the section on Abraham, Genesis chapter 12, but as much as it was talking about Abraham, it was talking about faith. And it asked this question, after all the other things, like, in your opinion, can somebody truly have faith if it never is shown in their life? That's a question. And we're going to look at that here in this section. But to do that, we're going to look at one more article just briefly. Not the whole article, but just a little bit. Here, it's called A Wake-Up Call for Every Genuine Christian. A wake-up call for every genuine Christian. It says, hatred for Christians is increasing at an alarming rate. We are persecuted constantly, and many of us have been intimidated and forced to compromise and accept what God calls abominable. Now, you're going to get people who say, well, Christians, you just have a persecution complex. You're not really being persecuted. You're just not used to not having your protected privilege. We just removed your privilege. No, there is the idea of privilege, and I had a book here that I read a couple of years ago called Preaching in a Postmodern World, and there is that aspect where to have a discussion, you've got to let the other side speak, and that's something that's important. But it's not what they're thinking. There is persecution is rising. Hatred of Christians is rising, and I've covered that in various ways. It says, we are finding it increasingly difficult to stand up to the world. The tidal wave of evil is sweeping over all the nations of the earth. Pornography, homosexuality, transgenderism, abortion drugs, and alcohol abuse are being supported by the governments everywhere, including, as I've said, Canada has in their laws, on their anti-conversion therapy law. Again, they used a Mott-and-Bailey experiment, Mott-and-Bailey fallacy to make it push through. But they said that any myth that says that there's only male and female, and that's currently in the law. In other words, they're calling the scriptures. The Canadian government as a country, Canada as a country, has within the codified laws of the country a law that calls the Bible nothing but a myth. That's hatred for Christians. And I had a problem with our MP for supporting that in aspects. So some Christians hold to the easy believism trope that tells them that they can live their lives how they want to without repercussions, since their proverbial ticket to heaven has been punched long ago. Many outside the church say that humans are fundamentally good and can simply choose to be moral without the needs for Christ's sacrifice. Unfortunately, some Christian politicians are buying into these demonic ideas. How I wish that the present-day leaders of America will grow a leaf from George Washington, who said, "Let us with caution indulge this supposition that morality can be maintained without religion." Scriptures say, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Isaiah 5:20. This is crucial because the distinction between good and evil is being lost by the majority of Western societies these days. All right, that's all I'm going to read of that article, because I wanted the start of it there. In there, some Christians hold to easy believism. Now, I want to talk about that paragraph first before I go on to what I want to talk about. What is easy believism? Here's the thing. One of the things I do hold, and I think the Scripture teaches, salvation is by faith alone and not by works, lest any man can boast. There's nothing we can do to achieve salvation out of our own works, and there's nothing we can do to lose salvation of our own works. Galatians covers this, particularly Galatians, I think it's Galatians 3. It asks a series of questions that Paul writes to the church of Galatia. Was it by works that you were saved, or was it by faith, in essence? And then he comes back with, if you receive salvation entirely by faith, therefore, what makes you think you can do anything to change that situation, or to lose it in that aspect? So yes, I firmly hold that the scriptures do teach, and that's after years of study and being challenged on it as well, which I understand. And it's fine to challenge that the scriptures hold it. Yeah, once you have come to faith, you are secure. Once you have a true faith. The easy believism is the idea that, oh, I said a prayer at a youth rally, or I said a prayer back when I was like 5 years old, that kind of thing. And I remember there was a lady who's passed away now, and I went to visit her in the hospital, and I knew she wasn't going to be long for the world. And when I went to talk to her about the issue of salvation, and she was like, "No, I believe I'm saved. I've gone to church my whole life. I did works," but it turns out, yeah, when I went to the funeral, and I was happy. It was one of the few times. I don't enjoy doing memorial services. I do them because they're an important aspect. I don't enjoy doing them by any way, shape, or form. Sometimes they're an honor to do. I did one here of a gentleman who was like 97, I think. He was up there like married, and he was married for like 73 years. So it was an honor to do his. It's still difficult, but it was an honor to do his. And I remember doing one that gentleman was 92, Christian his whole life, and married for 70 years. Those are an honor to do. But this is one that I was actually pleased that I was not asked to do. And when it was done, the eulogy was done. It didn't talk anything about faith. It talked completely about drunken exploits and all that, and partners and things like that. That it was kind of like, wow. It's like, what was that all? It's like this is the very definition of easy believism. It's the idea that, you know what, I said a prayer when I was like 4 years old, but then nothing in their life ever reflects the actual change. And then you get people today, and I've looked up this on funerals and memorial services, and to do a memorial service of an unbeliever, you'll actually find people who say, well, just do it as if they're a believer, because you don't know in the last couple of seconds, that last moment before death, that they could have given their life to Christ. It's like, Lord, I'm one who's of a belief. Could it happen? Sure. I had a young lady who passed away of cancer, I found them to be full of life choices because of their life choices brought in the hardships and the substance abuse. But a day before she passed, she put faith in Christ. Do I believe she's saved? Yes, absolutely. There's a difference there. But the easy believism says, oh, I said that prayer, therefore I'm good to go. I can do whatever I want. And so that question that my son was asked for his assignment, and I think it's a good one, is faith actually faith if there's no evidence? That's the question. Is faith actually faith if there's no evidence? And for this, I'm going to go to James. Now, James is one of those books that people are like, it's a legalistic book, but it's actually a very important one. And he's talking about this now. Faith without works is dead. That's the subtitle here. Look what he says. He says, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? Now, I'm going to stop there. There's a distinction between what James is saying and about faith and what Paul says about faith. James is talking about just a generic faith, is what he's talking about. A generic faith. I got faith. I remember the movie Cradle to the Grave. They would stand around, they're like, faith, faith, faith. I'm like, faith in what? Faith in what? What do you have faith in? What's the faith in? It's like, just have faith. Faith in what? Can someone says they have faith, but what kind of faith? I got faith that, yeah, I can fly. I have faith I can fly, and if I jump off my couch, I have all the faith in the world, but I'm still not going to fly. That's the way it's going to be. So just having faith can faith. This is, look at this. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them things by which they need for the body, what does it profit? James uses an example there. He says, look, you're saying, I love my brother or sister. I love my neighbor. Yet I see my neighbor in help, in need. I see them in him, and I have the means to help them, and I do nothing. Do I really love them? Would people say I love them? Will they know that they are loved? And look, I'm going to tell you from experience, no, they won't. They won't. Remember my wife and I, when we were first married, we ran into a problem with her visa. Yeah, a little bit of story time here. Ran into a problem with her visa, and it's something that came up, and I took it to my wife, and I said, look, we're going to have to call on this. And they said, you have to stop working immediately. Problem with her visa. And the reason that was so difficult is I was in school at the time. I was not working. She was our sole income. She was providing for the hubby, providing for me. In fact, the president of our school at the time, when we were at a function together, my wife, and he asked, well, he's like, well, what are you doing? She said, she's working. He said, oh, so you're getting your PhD. And she goes, PhD? And he goes, yeah, that's the putting hubby through. And my wife did that, and I'm appreciative of that. She looked after the bills. I picked up speaking engagements where I could, but she looked after the bills, and we were at a time we had no money. And we're talking that first Christmas that we were married, we had like 25 cents in our account. That's not an exaggeration. That's how much we had at the end of the year. The Lord met all our bills, but things were tight. And I remember we were going to the church, and we were talking to the church and said, look, this is what's happening. The church that I was placed in at the time. And their response was just this: be in peace, be warmed, and be filled, or we'll pray for you. Well, that's nice. Now, we're like, okay, it was a small church, so maybe they can't really help. But then when time went on, when a couple of months later, after a couple of months, they fast-tracked the visa, and we got the visa fixed, and she was back to work and given a full-time position and all that. And we gave thanks to the Lord for seeing us through, and this happened. The very next week when we were gathered, we were given offering envelopes and being asked to give. Saying, can you give? It's like, give to us. And we're like, wait, what? When we needed help, you guys did nothing. Now you want help? Like, what does it profit? It profits nothing. That's what James is saying. It's like you're saying you love your neighbor, but you see them in need and you say, go and be well, and you do nothing. What does it actually profit? He says, thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe there is one God. You do well. That's faith. So look, I believe there's a God. That's faith. I believe God is there. He says, but even demons believe and tremble. He says, but do you not know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? He says, was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered Isaac, his son, on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works faith was made perfect? It says, and the scripture was fulfilled. Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works, not by faith only. Now that's an important detail. And then you got Rahab. Likewise, Rahab, the harlot, was justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. What is he talking about here? He's talking about faith came first. He's not talking about the works. He's talking about the faith came first. In both those cases, Rahab and Abraham. I almost mixed the two names together, and it came up with Ahab, but Ahab had no faith. Abraham and Rahab had faith. Abraham, when he was called faith, when the actual verse, Abraham believed God, and it was crowned to him as righteous, it was talking about when God first just told Abraham that he was going to have a child, that through this child would be the descendant of the nations. But how did Abraham show that he really had faith? When was it that Abraham's faith was really on display, that it proved to everybody that he really did trust God? When he put Isaac on the altar, ready to sacrifice him. That's what it says. His faith was shown as perfect. It was made perfect. That's what it was talking about. Now notice he says the scripture was fulfilled. In other words, it was already declared that Abraham believed God, and it was accredited to him as righteousness in that case. It's funny because the Apostle Paul talks about saving faith, uses the same verse, but he leaves out it was fulfilled. He says, Abraham, or do you not know that Abraham believed God and it was accounted as righteous? It was by faith that Abraham was saved. It was by faith that Abraham was called a friend of God. And this was evident through his willingness to obey. What about Rahab? Is talking about what's recorded in the book of Joshua. When Joshua sent out the spies to Jericho, they came to the house of Rahab, the harlot, and it lets you know that that's what she was. How did she, and she's no longer Rahab the harlot, she's actually in the genealogy of Jesus. She was changed, a new creation. From Rahab the harlot, she became justified. How did she become justified? She started by faith. Go back and read the actual discussion that that Rahab has with the spies. He says, we know of what God did on the other side of the Jordan. We heard about how he dried up the Red Sea. We heard about what he did to the Egyptians. It's like, and we know Rahab knew who God was. All of Jericho knew who God was. But only Rahab had faith of who God is. She had faith that God was going to hand over the place. She had faith that God was able to save. She had faith that God was able to take care of her. And how was this evident? By how she treated the spies, the messengers. That's how it was treated. The rest of Jericho sought them out to kill them, to get rid of them. Rahab's like, no, I know that God is with you. I know that God is going to do what he said he's going to do. I'm going to throw my lot in with you. And her faith was made evident by what she did. There's where the question is. My son came to the conclusion that faith is not faith unless you actually put it in action. That was of his own. And we talked about it a little bit. It was just something simple. I said, let's take a simple action. I said, you have faith that the chair can hold your weight. He said, yeah. I said, but does somebody really have that faith until they're sitting in the chair? He's like, well, no. And he came to the conclusion that it wasn't just faith, just saying I have something is not a real faith. Just saying, yes, I know that Jesus died. Yes, I know that that God created the universe. But do we really have faith? The question is, do we really have faith unless it shows up in our life? Do we really have faith that Jesus has made us a new creation if we still live as the old creation? Romans talks about this. Let's go to Romans chapter 6. It says this, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin so that grace may abound? That's a logical argument that people have. I can live however I want. I can do whatever I want, and I got forgiveness now. I've got my get out of jail free card. I get my get out of hell free card. I am good to go. But do they really have faith? And the Apostle Paul is driving it home here, saying, no, it is not. You say, well, you can't judge somebody else's salvation. Well, the Apostle Paul is passing a judgment here. In fact, in John's writing, he does. In John's letter, he does. He says, they were not of us, or else they would have stayed. John passes a judgment of those who were in the church. He says, they joined the church. They were part of us. They departed from us. And just why? Because they weren't really a part of us. If they were really a part of us, they wouldn't have left. So John, he's passing judgment on a salvation issue. He's saying, no, they are not believers. They claimed faith. They tried it, but it showed that it was not actually faith that they had. Paul here's making the same case. Is it really faith if we don't live it? And he gives the answer. He says, certainly not. It is not. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Absolutely not. He says, how shall we who died to sin live any longer in it? It is one of the aspects. We sing it. Philip Craig indeed did a song. I actually love the song. It's based on the verse that Paul wrote. I am crucified with Christ. Therefore, I no longer live, but it is Christ who lived in me. And Paul's going to drive this home. We died to sin. We died from it. How can we continue in it? He says, or do you not know that as many of us as were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Therefore, we were buried with him through baptism into death. Then just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we should also walk in the newness of life. There you get also a depiction of baptism. That what the act of baptism actually is. When we go into the water, we're lowered down, we have died to self, we are buried into Christ, into his death, and as we come out of the water, we are raised to new life as Christ was raised. So therefore, if we are buried with him through baptism and death, just as Christ is raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we should also walk in the newness of life. Therefore, the Christian cannot continue to live the way that they did. There should be this change. For if we have been united together in the likeness of his death, certainly we also shall be in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin. For he who has died has been freed from sin. Now if we died with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him, knowing that Christ, having been raised from the dead, dies no more. Death no longer has dominion over him. For that death that he died to sin once for all, but the life that he lives to God. Likewise, you also reckon yourselves to be dead indeed to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in its lusts. And do not present your members as an instrument of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. Now, what is he talking about here? He's talking about those who claim to be followers of Christ, who say they are new, but they're living a life that is contrary, that is very much contrary to the life of the believer. This is the same as those who like to associate themselves with their sin. Isn't it amazing? You get this term, I'm a gay Christian. No, you are not. There is no such thing as a gay Christian. No more should there be anyone who says, you know what? I am an adulterous Christian. I am a lying Christian. I'm an abusive Christian. I am a drunken Christian. These things should never be. The Christian should never be associated with their sin. The Christian should not be given into their sin. Are there times we fall to sin? Yes. Are there times we fall to temptation? Yes. But the difference is we should not be constantly living a life that is contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ, because we are made new. When my son was deciding, how do you know that Abraham had faith in God? How do you know? And he was actually studying Genesis 12. And he said, well, God told him to go and Abraham went. I'm like, yeah, that's faith. He left his family. He left the country he knew. He went to a place he didn't know. All because God told him. That is faith. If we said Abraham had faith, but he never left home, when God said, I'm going to give you the land of promise, and Abraham says, that's good, and he stays right where he is. Yeah, I believe God's going to. No, God told him to go. The faith was God would look after him. The Christian needs the wake-up call in our culture today, because I think what is happening is that we have fallen into this trap where we're just becoming just like the world. When the church looks exactly like the world, why would the world see that it needs a savior? That's the problem. He said, well, you can't judge. Who are you to judge? That, I think, is the lie that the enemy, that we've bought into from the enemy. We bought into this thing, you can't judge anything. But yes, you can. You make judgments all the time. And in fact, you say, well, how do you judge? Look, the scriptures make the statement, we're going to judge the angels. Think about that for a second. We're going to judge the angels. If we have been qualified by the grace of God through his Spirit to judge the angels, how much more is it that we can judge in our own world? That's the truth of it. And people don't want to think about that. You say, well, you can't do that. That's being mean. That's being unloving. No, it is not being unloving. And you're wondering, it's like, what does it say that we're going to judge the angels? 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3. That's what it says. Know ye not that we shall judge angels? And then it asks the questions. Then how much more the things of this life? So yeah, we're in a place where, yes, we can say, that is wrong. This is what's holding believers accountable. One of the biggest issues that is happening in the church today is somebody comes along and says, yes, I'm a Christian. And they get into the church and people are like, oh, they're a Christian. And they're like, I want to involve myself in the church. I want to involve myself in the life of the church. I want to be a worship leader. I want to be a kids leader. And then you discover that nothing in their life is actually a Christian. This is why churches were supposed to, before they welcome into membership, to do interviews, to do background checks. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing. Now, you're not talking about saying, oh, they can never come to church. You're talking about they're allowing them to infiltrate the church. And that means becoming an essential part of the ministry when their life doesn't reflect it. This is an issue. When you allow drunkards, adulterers, abusers, a place on the stage and behind the pulpit, you're going to bring reproach to the name of Christ. The Christian needs to stand up, not just say, hey, look, this is wrong in the world, but say, this is not acceptable even in my life and in the life of other Christians. We need to hold each other accountable. That's the job of the church. We cannot just accept anybody who says they have faith. Look, Lady Gaga said she had faith, she's a Christian. And I know the first reaction, people go, well, who are you to judge? I'm judging the fruit. I am. Are you going to say that the false teachers that are out there are actually have faith in Christ? Or would you say, no, they don't. They're false. They're false believers. They're false shepherds. Yes, they are. But hold on. Didn't you just make a judgment on their salvation? Well, yeah, you did. You see, although it's true we cannot know the heart, it's out of the wellspring of the heart the mouth speaks. Out of the wellspring of the heart brings forth fruit. Anybody who is in Christ, who's abiding in Christ, will bear fruit. And the scriptures even said in that same passage, anybody who does not bear fruit will be cut off. Not everybody who claims to be a Christian is. That's the parable of the wheat and the tares. The two will grow up together. They look the same until the maturity comes. And then there's a distinct difference between the two. If somebody says, yes, I accepted Christ, but then they spend their entire life living as if they didn't, we have serious reason to question their commitment. We really do. Were they saved? Isn't it amazing also that Jesus tells the parable of the four soils? And notice only the first group, the one that lands on the rock, only that one is to say that they didn't believe. You got the sower throws the seeds on the rocky ground. It actually says they receive the truth and it grows up. But it has no root. It's not real faith. They accept it because it makes them feel good, makes their life better. But when there's no real root, they go back to their old life. Those with thorns as well. It actually sprouts. They obviously had some kind of faith, but it was not saving faith. And see, I think there is a wake-up call for the Christian that we need to know and say, look, we have to live this. One of the saddest things that I saw recently was a group that was leading a workshop on how to live a Christian life in the workplace. Now, truthfully, I never attended it, so I don't know the full details of it. But it's this question of what does it mean to live your faith in the workplace. And I think one of that leads to the issue is that people don't know how to be a Christian. They don't. Let me redefine it. They don't know what it means to be a Christ follower. They don't know what it means to say, what it actually means to be, I've been crucified with Christ. When we have churches that are okay with divorce, that are okay with putting anybody in teaching roles, okay with anybody in leadership roles, and say it's fine, and they neglect the truths of the Scripture, they neglect to look at what does God want, when they're more concerned with filling the position with somebody than they are filling it with a godly person, we've got a problem. Have we forgotten what it meant to be a follower of Christ? Do we really need this wake-up call? I think we do. This is the problem that we run into. So you need to answer that question. I think it's a good assignment my son had. Is faith really faith if there's no evidence in the life? And maybe we need that wake-up call and come to Christ and say, look, I'm struggling. And look, there's a difference between somebody who struggles with sin. We all struggle with sin. I struggle with sin too. I do. We all struggle with sin. But there's a difference between struggling with sin and living a life persistently in it, allowing it to have mastery over us. That's where we got to draw the line. We cannot continue in sin so grace may abound, thinking that grace will abound. We cannot continue to sin and think that everything will be all right. We need a faith that is secure, a faith that shows itself through the life of the believer. That's what James is talking about. He's talking about the fact, yes, it is salvation by faith alone, but that faith, if we have it, should be evident in all that we do. And maybe the first place we need to start is just simply saying, Jesus, help me to abide in you so that I will bear fruit. That's what we need. That's where we're going to be. All right, let's call an end there. Let's stop there for this episode. As always, I thank you for joining me here, and I do hope that you continue to grow on the foundation of Christ, that you challenge the things that are around you, the worldview that are around you, and you compare it to the solid foundation. And if you would like to support the work that happens here, I don't ask for money. I really don't. I never ask for money. I do this just kind of as the way it is. All I ask is that you would share it, that you would support it by that way. Share it, like it, tell others about it. If it's an encouragement to you, I encourage you to share it that way, that others may grow as well. But until next time, may you grow on that firm foundation of Jesus Christ. May you stand firm on it, not be shaken, knowing that it is in Him that you have life. It's in Him that you have purpose and value and reason to be. So stand firm on the foundation of Jesus Christ, and may you not be moved.